Hello and welcome to the Biological Resources Information Program for Caltrans contract number 09-370704. This presentation is brought to you by Alluvian Biological Consulting. This training has four broad objectives. Hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll be familiar with all four of these points. First, we're going to cover the definition and implications of take, and then we'll move on to what your responsibilities are if you encounter a regulated species. We'll have a brief introduction to the protected species associated with this project, and then we'll go over some general mitigation measures that need to be followed in order to prevent any incidents of take. So let's talk a little bit about take. Take is a very broadly defined term. California has a different definition for it than the federal government does, but they're both very similar. So for the federal definition, take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. California's definition is to hunt, pursue, catch, capture, or kill, or attempt to do any such actions. They're very, very similar, and they both mean pretty much the same thing. Anything that constitutes harassment or more is going to qualify as take. And the reason that it's important for you to know what take is because take of listed or regulated species can carry some pretty hefty penalties. Criminal penalties can go as high as $50,000 and up to a year in jail time in some instances. And civil penalties can get almost as high as the criminal penalties financially. So it's incredibly important that you know what take is and you avoid take as much as you possibly can so you can avoid these penalties. So what should you do if you encounter a regulated species on the project? Well, the very first thing you should do is ensure that you do not touch or approach the animal. You should then immediately suspend work within the area the animal was found, especially if this work would result in take. Your next step is to notify your supervisor or the on-site biologist. And if a biologist is not on site, please contact Gennaro Lockhart at the number listed on this slide and in your training materials. The next few slides will give you a brief overview of all of the listed and regulated species that occur on this project site. Bank swallow is the smallest species of swallow found in the United States, measuring 4.5 to 5.5 inches in length. This species exhibits dark plumage along its back and white plumage along its underside, with a dark band across its chest. Bank swallows form colonies, sometimes numbering in the thousands, along vertical bluffs near water bodies. Adults excavate nesting burrows in the loose soils of embankments, and in many cases these birds will use the exposed slopes of raised motorways or construction site excavations. Breeding takes place from May through July, and clutches usually range from 3 to 8 eggs, and those eggs are incubated for 12 to 16 days. Chicks are tended by both parents and fledge after 12 to 24 days. Swainson's hawk is a medium to large-sized hawk with adults getting up to 21 inches in length with 52-inch wingspans. Their plumage is variable, and there are usually two color morphs. The first morph is a light phase, which have dark heads, breast bands, and light bellies, while the dark phase birds are going to be sooty black. Both color phases have bicolored underwings, dark gray flight feathers, lighter wing linings, a broad tail, and long, relatively narrow pointed wings. In March and April, they arrive on breeding grounds in the Solano and Central Valley counties, as well as the interior valleys of the coastal ranges. Breeding habitat includes woodlands, savanna, grasslands, and scattered trees. Swainson's hawk require large tracts of grassland and open land for which to forage. During migration and foraging, they use open lowlands, and these hawks typically occur at elevations from sea level to 1,500 feet. Western burrowing owl is a small, brown, mottled owl that stands about 7 to 9 inches in height. True to its name, the burrowing owl nests in a hole in the ground. Although it's quite willing to dig its own burrow, it often uses one that's already provided by prairie dogs, skunks, ground squirrels, or other wildlife. Burrowing owls require habitat with open, well-drained terrain, short, sparse vegetation, and underground burrows. During the breeding season, they may also need enough permanent cover and taller vegetation within their foraging range to provide them with sufficient prey. Because of this, burrowing owls can occupy a wide range of habitats, including grasslands, agricultural areas, urban vacant lots, as well as the margins of airports. Breeding in California can start as early as January and continue through September. The peak of breeding is in April. Burrowing owls can lay anywhere between 1 to 11 eggs. The young hatch in about 30 days and fledge after 45 days. They will remain at the burrow for some time, foraging at night with the adults, until they're ready to fledge on their own. This section applies to all of the bird species that has been previously covered and any other species covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or California Department of Fish and Wildlife Fish and Game Code 3503. A variety of bird species have been found nesting in or immediately adjacent to Caltrans right-of-ways. Nest sites are often placed in crevices, cavities, seams, or weep holes within bridges. Other nests are constructed on open, vertical cement surfaces on bridges. The species that utilize man-made structures as nest sites tend to be more tolerant of urban conditions. These conditions might be increased noise, light, vibration, or simply human presence. But they can nonetheless be sufficiently disturbed during construction or maintenance activities, enough to cause nest abandonment or inattentiveness, which would result in the death or loss of eggs or juveniles. Incubation and brood rearing require approximately 4 to 5 weeks for smaller birds, but can take up to 12 weeks for larger raptors. And this is why it's incredibly important that we get nest deterrents up on the project site and prevent nesting as soon and as often as possible. So now we're going to go over some of the species protection measures for this project. This won't be an exhaustive list of all of the species protection measures for this project, but just a summary of some of the important points. A full list of the species protection measures for this project can be found in your Biological Resources Information Program booklet, so please reference your booklet for the rest of those measures. If a listed or regulated species shows up on or near the project site, we'll need to set up a protective radius for it. The radius is a no-work buffer that needs to remain in place until the animal leaves the area. And for this project, all regulated species carry a radius of 100 feet unless otherwise noted in this table. There are several general protective measures that need to be followed on this project. I'll go over these quickly, but you should review these measures in your training materials. First of all wildlife should be allowed to leave the job site unharmed, and this includes any animals that don't carry state or federal protections. On top of this, to prevent wildlife entrapment on the project, all excavations, and this includes trenches, holes, and pits, as well as all pipes and hoses, need to be covered at the end of each workday. If covering an excavation is not practical, earthen or wooden escape ramps need to be installed every 15 feet along the exposed excavation. Additionally, all food-related waste generated on the site needs to be contained in sealed trash containers. These containers need to be removed from the site daily, and the reason for this is because food waste tends to attract wildlife, and wildlife on a project site could ultimately cause delays. The next 3 points will help avoid more indirect effects on wildlife. And starting with the environmentally sensitive areas. ESA fencing should be up to mark all of the sensitive areas near the project. No work is allowed in these areas, and if the ESA fencing is knocked over or damaged for any reason, it needs to be repaired immediately. Also, during construction operations, stockpiling of construction materials, portable equipment, vehicles, and supplies needs to be restricted to the designated construction staging areas. These areas must be located in upland habitat and may not cover riparian vegetation or leave material where it may be washed into a water body. And as always on projects like this, best management practices need to be employed in any instance where there's a risk of discharging sediment or hazardous materials into the soil or a nearby water body. All BMPs should be inspected immediately before and immediately after storms. Discharge of sediment into water bodies is strictly prohibited. We'll finish up with some important takeaways from this presentation. Perhaps the most important takeaway is remembering what your responsibilities are if you see a regulated species within the project site. Don't touch or approach regulated wildlife and immediately report encounters to your supervisor or the on-site biologist. Perhaps the most important takeaways after that are to stay out of the environmentally sensitive areas and to maintain BMPs as needed along the site. You and your company are wholly responsible for following the measures in this training as well as the permits and specifications for this project. So please revisit this video and your training materials as needed. I appreciate you following along with this presentation. If you have any questions about what's been covered in this presentation, your training materials, the permits, project specifications, please direct them to your on-site alluvian biologist.